Put your feet up, ready for Skellig. This is chapter 34. I sat at the kitchen table with Mina. Her mother was above us cutting up lettuce and tomatoes and bread. The table was spread with paper and paints. Mina had been painting all afternoon. There were little streaks of paint on her face. Her fingers were bright with daubs of colour. There was a large drawing of Skellig standing erect with his wings high above his shoulders. He gazed out at us, smiling. "What if she sees it?" I whispered. "It could be anyone," said Mina, "or anything." Her mother turned towards us. "Good, isn't it, Michael?" she said. I nodded. "The kind of thing William Blake saw. He said we were surrounded by angels and spirits. We must just open our eyes a little wider, look a little harder." She pulled a book from a shelf, showed me Blake's pictures of the winged beings he saw in his little home in London. "Maybe we could all see such beings, if only we knew how to," she said. She touched my cheek. "But it's enough for me to have you two angels at my table." She stared hard at us, making her eyes wide and unblinking. "Yes," she smiled. "Isn't it amazing? I see you clearly, two angels at my table." I thought of the baby. I wondered what she would see with her innocent eyes. I wondered what she would see if she were near to death. I turned my mind away from her. I pulled a sheet of paper towards me. I found myself drawing Coot, giving him twisted arms and legs and bright red hair. I drew hair sprouting from his back, his chest, his legs. "That's your friend," said Mina, "a proper little demon." I looked at her, looked just past her, wanting to see her ghostly wings again. Her mother started singing, "I dreamt a dream, what can it mean? And that I was a maiden queen." "I went back to him today," Mina whispered. I drew horns growing from Coot's skull. "I came for you first," she said. "Your dad said you'd gone to school. Shouldn't I be working?" he said. "Shouldn't I be at my lessons?" She leaned over and drew a skinny black tongue protruding from Coot's mouth. "Guarded by an angel mild, witless woe was ne'er beguiled." Skellig said. "Where's Michael?" whispered Mina. "At school," I said. "School," he said. "He abandons me for school." I said you hadn't abandoned him. I said you loved him. "I do," I whispered. "I said how terrified you were that the baby might die." "She won't," I said. "She mustn't." "He says you must keep coming to see him." She chewed her lip, leaned closer. "He says he's going away soon, Michael." So he took his wings and fled when the morning blushed rosy red. "Going away?" I said. "Yes." "Where to?" She shook her head. He wouldn't say. "When?" "Soon." My hands were trembling. I grabbed some more paper. I drew Skellig flapping across a pale sky. Soon my angel came again. I was armed, he came in vain. Her mother leaned over us, began clearing a space to put down our plates. "For the time of youth was fled," she sang, "and grey hairs were upon my head." "Come on," she said, "bunk up, food's ready." "That's a lovely picture, Michael." Chapter 35. We waited at the table as the light faded and Dad didn't come. I kept going to the front room, looking out into the street, seeing nothing. Mina's mother kept comforting me. "Don't worry, Michael, he'll come soon. Don't worry, Michael, I'm sure everything's all right." We drew and drew. I drew my family gathered around the baby. I drew Mina with her pale face, her dark hair, the black fringe of her hair cut dead straight across her brow. I drew Skellig, lying dry and dusty and useless on the garage floor. Then I drew him standing proudly by the arched window, with the owls flying around him. I stared at the changed Skellig. How had this happened to him? Was it just Chinese food and cod liver oil and aspirin and brown ale and dead things left by owls? I drew Ernie Myers in striped pyjamas looking out into the wilderness. I felt how the more I drew, the more my hand and arm became free. I saw how what appeared on the page looked more and more like what I saw, or what I thought of in my head. I felt how by drawing my mind became concentrated, even while one part of it still thought about and worried about the baby. I drew the baby time and again, sometimes focusing on her wide, bold eyes, sometimes on her tiny hands, sometimes on the way her whole body arched when she rested on your knee. I drew the world as the baby might see it. The long hospital ward filled with lumbering adults, the networks of wires and tubes and bleeping instruments filling the foreground, the faces of nurses smiling down. I drew the world twisted into weird shapes by the curved glass case that covered her. In the end, I drew Skellig at the door to the ward. I felt the burst of excitement she would feel to see this, the quickening of her heart, the flickering of her life. Mina looked at my drawings one after the other. She made a pile of them before her. She gripped my hand. "You couldn't have done these before," she said. "You're getting braver and bolder." I shrugged. "You get better at playing football by playing football," I said. "You get better at drawing by drawing." We waited and waited. The light fell. The blackbirds sang in the trees and hedges outside. Mina's mother switched a lamp on. The phone rang, but it wasn't Dad. Mina's mother gave us little squares of chocolate that I allowed to melt slowly and gently on my tongue. She kept singing songs from time to time. Some of them were songs of Blake's, some were ancient folk songs. Mina joined in sometimes with her bold, high voice. The sun descended in the west, the evening star does shine, the birds are silent in their nest, and I must seek for mine. Mina smiled at my silence. Soon we'll have you singing too, she said. The day darkened and darkened. I want to show you something, said Mina. She filled a little bowl with warm water and put it on the table. She reached up onto the shelf and took down a ball of skin and bone and fur, like the one she'd taken from the garage floor. She dropped it into the warm water. She rubbed it with her fingers. It separated into fragments of dark fur and ripped skin. She pulled out tiny bones. There was a skull, the skull of a tiny animal. Her mother watched and smiled. Another owl pellet, she said. Yes, said Mina. She looked at me. Owls eat their victims whole, Michael, she said. They digest the flesh, then they regurgitate the parts that can't be digested. Skin and bone and fur. You can see what the owl has been eating by inspecting the pellet. This owl, like most owls, has eaten small creatures like mice or voles. Her mother turned away, worked at the sink. This is the pellet I brought out from the garage, she whispered. There were dozens of them in there, Michael. It came from Skellig, I whispered. She nodded. What does it mean? She shook her head. What is he? She shook her head. There was nothing more I could say. Extraordinary, she hissed. She started singing again. When I looked out into the street, I saw lights in the windows, the treetops etched black against the mauve sky. I looked up and saw the last birds heading for their nests. Then the phone went again, and this time it was Dad. Mina's mother held the handset out to me. I couldn't go to it. She smiled. Come on, she said. Come on. Dad said everything was fine. The baby was sleeping. He'd seen the doctors. He was staying for a little while longer with Mum. Is the baby okay? I said. What are they going to do? They'll operate tomorrow, he said. What are they going to do? No answer. Dad, what are they going to do? I heard the sighing, the fear in his voice. They're operating on her heart, Michael. He said some more, but I couldn't hear it. Something about being with me soon, about how everything would be fine, about how Mom sent me her love. I dropped the phone. They're operating on her heart, I whispered. Chapter 36. I went out into the front garden with Mina. We sat on the front wall waiting for Dad's car turning into the street. The door was open behind us, letting a wedge of light out into the dark. Whisper came, slinking through the shadows below the wall. He sat below us, curled against our feet. What does it mean, I said, if Skellig eats living things and makes pellets like the owls? She shrugged. We can't know, she said. What is he? I said. We can't know. Sometimes we just have to accept there are things we can't know. Why is your sister ill? Why did my father die? She held my hand. Sometimes we think we should be able to know everything, but we can't. We have to allow ourselves to see what there is to see, and we have to imagine. We talked about the fledglings in the nest above us. We tried together to hear their breathing. We wondered what blackbird babies dreamed about. Sometimes they'll be very scared, said Mina. They'll dream about cats climbing towards them. They'll dream about dangerous crows with ugly beaks. They'll dream about vicious children plundering the nest. They'll dream of death all around them. But there will be happy dreams as well, dreams of life. They'll dream of flying like their parents do. They'll dream of finding their own tree one day, building their own nest, having their own chicks. I held my hand to my heart. What would I feel when they opened the baby's fragile chest, when they cut into her tiny heart? Mina's fingers were cold and dry and small. I felt the tiny pulse of blood in them. I felt how my own hand trembled very quickly, very gently. We're still like chicks, she said, happy half the time, dead scared. I closed my eyes and tried to discover where the happy half was hiding. I felt the tears trickling through my tightly closed eyelids. I felt Whisper's claws tugging at my jeans. Wanted to be all alone in an attic like Skellig with just owls and moonlight and an oblivious heart. You're so brave, said Mina. And then Dad's car came, with its blaring engine and its glaring lights, and the fear just increased and increased and increased. And that's it for today. More next time. See you soon. Bye-bye.